Hello everybody, and welcome to yet another video blog by yours truly. Today is Thursday, September the 11th, and I thought, being today was September the 11th, I would do a video blog basically on the day itself, 9/11. Of course, today is the 13th anniversary of the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11th, 2001. Not a subject matter I tend to talk about a lot, but it is something that did have a profound effect on me, and me being, of course, the history nut that I am, it's one of those things that I go back and I look at and reflect upon on a bit of a regular basis. As far as today's video, though, I kind of wanted to go back to that day itself and kind of look back at, how that day was for me and the few days that followed that. And that morning, which of course was Tuesday, September the 11th, 2001, at the time, I was working for Kmart. And as it happened, I had a day off from work at that particular day. I was still living with the family at the time. Specifically, I was living with my mom and my sister and her husband and their daughter, my oldest niece, Robin. And that particular day, which I had plans with my brother that morning, actually. We were going to make a drive down to Hutchinson to the Kansas State Fair. And if you're familiar with my brother and I over the years, he and I have been avid autograph collectors, and we were in pursuit that day to meet whomever it was that was performing or scheduled to perform at the state fair that evening. And at this moment in time, it escapes me as to exactly who that was. Although I do recall their flight was grounded and they never made that show, and it was, I believe, canceled that night. Be that as it may, being that I was off from work that day, I did sleep in a little bit. Woke up that morning, and I don't, off the top of my head, recall what time it was, but back in those days, when I was living with my mom, she had a TV on the kitchen breakfast bar there, and Mom was then and still is today an avid fan of watching the news on television. Specifically, she always has liked the Fox News channel. Please don't hold that against her. That day I rolled out of bed and made myself some breakfast and sat down and flipped on the television. And I turned on the TV just in time to see the collapse of the South Tower of the World Trade Center, which was the first of two towers to collapse. It was actually the second of which to be impacted by an aircraft that morning. And it was a surreal moment. I will never forget it. I thought for about 5 seconds I was watching a movie. The levity of the situation clearly had not hit me at that point in time, so it was just an unbelievable moment. Looking back on it, the whole world it shook, and the whole world changed just in the moments of what happened that morning. And I remember very vividly. I got up from the bar stool I was sitting out there at the breakfast bar, and I went to my mom's room and I woke her up. She hadn't quite woke up that morning, and I told her what was going on. The first words out of her mouth, she looked at me like clockwork. The first words out of her mouth and said to me, "Osama bin Laden." She knew. She watched the news channels enough that she knew what was going on. And as it turned out that day, my brother and I did make the drive to Hutchinson. We did get there and find out that whomever the musical act was that was scheduled to perform was not going to arrive due to their flight being grounded, with every aircraft in the United States being grounded, and something that had never happened before that day and actually has not happened since. Every single aircraft grounded. And I remember that order came out just before my brother and I left to go to Hutchinson that morning. And to actually be outside all day, or for a good portion of that day, and see no aircraft in the sky is very unusual. I mean, where I'm living now, I'm not far from an airport, so not unusual to see aircraft going across the sky or hearing them from my home on a regular basis. So, not seeing aircraft in the sky that day was very surreal. That night, September 11th, 2001, now anybody that knows me well knows that I am an avid fan of wrestling, WWE, what have you. At that point in time, the WWE, which I'm not sure if it had actually changed its name at that point, it had been WWF for many, many years prior to changing its name. It was, I think, in early 2002 they changed their name. They were scheduled to do a TV taping of their show SmackDown that night, and I believe they were scheduled, if I'm not mistaken, to be in Houston, Texas that particular night. And with everything going on with the terrorist attacks, they actually postponed that event by 2 days to Thursday, September 13th. And they aired that episode live as opposed to being taped that night. Well, back then, SmackDown aired on a channel called UPN, which I did not have. I was not part of the Cox cable lineup at that point in time. Occasionally, then, the local Fox station would re-air that SmackDown the following Saturday. Well, that following Saturday, which was September the 15th, I was actually on the desktop PC that belonged to my sister and her husband. I was viewing the SmackDown clips on their website, WWF.com, at the time. And the beginning of that episode, which featured an opening monologue from company owner Vince McMahon. Preceding that was the national anthem, which was sang on the air for the events of September the 11th. Now, that SmackDown taping was, as far as I know, the first public gathering of any kind that followed the terrorist attacks. And that event was opened with ring announcer Lillian Garcia, who's also a singer. It's a terrific singing voice, and she sang a version of the national anthem. And I will never forget the moment I listened to her singing the national anthem. It was then, at that moment, that the levity of what happened on that September day, that September 11th, actually hit me. The emotion of it. It was the first time I was emotional. That national anthem brought me to tears, and it was then that I realized that the world had changed. The world as I had known it had changed. And in 2001, I was 26 years old, and everything changed that day. And that one national anthem, one of the most beautiful renditions to this day that I've ever heard of. It was amazing. And whether or not Lillian hears these words, and actually, now that I think about it, it was a little more than 2 months later, in November of 2001, that I traveled to Wichita with my friend Chuck. He and I went to actually a SmackDown taping, as it were, as the first television taping of WWF television taping I'd ever been to. I met her that particular afternoon, and I remember speaking to her briefly about that, how it had moved me to tears with the levity of the situation. And Lillian Garcia is originally from New York, so affecting me that way, I don't know how she held it together to sing that national anthem, being that it just happened to her hometown, but I remember giving her very kind words that particular day, and she's a very gracious person. And if you go through, I hope I have that picture up. I have several photos with famous people, celebrities, and from the wrestling community as well, up on my Facebook page and in a photo folder. Remember if I have that picture up or not. If I don't, I'm gonna have to find it and scan it and get it up. But she's a terrific person, and it was because of her version of the national anthem that it hit me as far as what happened on that September day. But it hasn't changed my resolve. I find myself being ever vigilant. I mean, I realize that there's always that possibility that it could happen again. Even 13 years later, there are still people in this world that want to harm Americans, and it's probably always going to be that way. And that's the world, unfortunately, that we live in. I don't live in fear. That just lets the terrorists win. And I know you've all probably heard that 3 million times, but that's the way it rolls sometimes. They do not want to ever live in fear, because then they win. That being said, I will say on this Patriot Day, September 11, 2014, I'm as proud as ever to be an American, regardless of the condition of the country right now, be it financially, economically, what have you. I go on record saying that I'm not the biggest fan of our current president. I do see positive things he's done. There are negatives. That comes with every president. But that doesn't make me any less proud to be an American. It doesn't matter who's in the White House. Doesn't matter who's in Congress. Doesn't matter who's in the Senate. That's irrelevant to me. I'll always be a proud American, a proud citizen of this country. And I do love the United States. I love America. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to end this particular blog by saying, first and foremost, my thoughts, prayers, sympathies to the families of all of those innocent lives lost on that fateful September morning. 2,977 innocent lives lost that morning. Let us never forget them. I will never forget that day. I will never forget them. Too many innocent lives just gone that particular day. My heart, as always, will go out to all of those people that lost loved ones that were close to them. I could not imagine losing somebody that way. That would just be beyond any comprehension that I could ever even think of. And I just, my heart has always gone out to them. To lose someone close to you in such a horrifying manner. They have my heart, my sympathy, and sympathies and condolences. I hope someday that if it is in the good Lord's will that I can get to New York City to see the 9/11 National Memorial there at Ground Zero. That's something I truly would like to do. That being said, as far as those victims and their families, I'm going to end this blog with a moment of silence for those victims and lives lost that particular morning. And that will close out this vlog. I will now have that moment of silence for them. God bless America. We'll see you on the next blog. So long, everybody.